Chief reporter Robert Mendick, a regular on the Daily T, recently visited Pope County in Minnesota. He was there to meet a woman called Shannon Owen, who was widowed a few years ago after her police officer husband, Josh Owen, was shot by a man he was trying to arrest. Her story was brought to the nation's attention earlier this year at a Donald Trump rally. Rob, lovely to see you again from the US. Tell us more about this story. You spent a long time chatting to Shannon. Just give us an idea of what she was like.
She was an absolute sweetheart. I mean, just heartbreaking. Her husband was murdered, killed in the line of duty 18 months ago. It was on his birthday, his 44th birthday. She'd made him his favourite steak dinner and made him a cake for them to eat with their little boy, who was then 10, Rylan. And his phone goes off, and it's a request for emergency backup to a nearby town where they need to make an arrest for a domestic violence incident. So he gets into the car, blue lights going, and of course, never comes home. The cake goes in the bin. The rest of the steak dinner goes in the bin. And she's really struggling to come to terms with that 18 months on.
We've got some clips, Rob, from your very moving interview to play. If you can hear a scribbling sound, that's Rob taking notes in shorthand. Let's just listen to Shannon talking about arriving at the hospital after being told her husband had been shot.
Everyone here, everyone in the area, I think state troopers were there. I think we had every single cop in the whole entire area around in there. And so I knew it was really bad, and I was worried because I didn't know if it was a head wound or I just didn't know. And after a little while, Dale Danter's wife is actually the head nurse at the hospital. So she grabbed me by the arm, and she said, "Shannon, it's going to be really bad." She's like, "I'm going to hold your arm when we go in there." And I didn't know what I was going to see. I had no clue what I was walking into. And I walked in there, and it was nothing but cops and nurses surrounding him. And he had just a sheet kind of covering over his part of his body, but he had a machine on him, and I didn't understand at the time what it was. I thought it was life support, but it was actually to keep his organs alive. And I went over there to hold his hand, and he was ice cold. So I already knew by then that he was gone. And I just screamed. And I was just angry and upset and confused because I thought he was still with me, and he was already, it'd been a while. I think after seeing the video and everything, he died instantly.
I mean, anyone listening to that, it's absolutely horrific. But then to compound matters, she gets a call from Tim Walz. That's Kamala Harris's running partner. He has been the governor of Minnesota since 2019. He hasn't, at that point, been picked as the potential vice president, but he makes the call and he makes her angry. Let's just hear a very brief clip of that.
You've never been a supporter of the police, and I just appreciate it if you just don't come anywhere near my town.
No, I totally understand. Respect your rights. Our office is here to support you in any way you need. And again.
Now, you can hear the emotion, but it is a bit hard to actually hear the specifics. But that is Shannon telling Tim Walz, the governor of her state, not to come anywhere near the funeral of her husband. And Walz replies saying he understands and respects her rights, and he offers his support. Rob, now having spoken to Shannon, can you explain to us what's going on? Why was there this clash between Shannon and Tim Walz?
You've got to go back to the murder of George Floyd, the thing that started the Black Lives Matter. Black man killed by a police officer in Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin, who's now serving time for that murder. Remember, he knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes while George Floyd said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." In the days after that, there was rioting in Minneapolis. Tim Walz was the governor of Minnesota at the time. And under pressure from both sides, really, under pressure from civil rights activists, there was a this is the state that started the defund the police movement. He was sort of under pressure to bring in reforms to make the police more accountable, to change some of the techniques for restraining, et cetera, et cetera. Those kind of obvious trigger points that were hugely problematic. On the other side, the Republicans were trying to stop him bringing in measures that they felt sort of emasculated the police. And Shannon is really expressing the concerns of police officers and the concerns of her own husband, who in the days before he died said, I don't want to do this job anymore. It's becoming too dangerous. I don't have the necessary backing and support of the state that I need. I don't have the techniques available anymore, or the ones I used to have. I don't have the respect. So that in a sort of 13-month period between Josh's death and another death this year, five first responders, 4 police officers, and a firefighter paramedic died in the line of duty, shot and killed. It's an incredibly dangerous job being a police officer in America because, there's so many guns about, not least. So, every time you go out there, and Shannon knew this, every time Josh went out there, his life was in his hands. She hugged him goodbye on the night he went off to that emergency call, just as he did every single time, because she always wondered if he was coming back. So you can see it on both sides, as I always can, that, there was a need to rein in some of the excesses of the police and the brutality in Minneapolis. But at the same time, the police are really unhappy with this. And it's a problem for the Democrats. It's a problem for Walz because, they need to be seen as the party of law and order. And if widows of cops are saying, I can't back him, don't come to my funeral. And what she said to Walz wasn't captured on that audio. She said, if you come near my town, I'm going to escort your ass out of here. And that's a hell of a thing to tell the governor. I mean, he wasn't vice presidential candidate at the time, but boy, she stood up to him.
Rob, we're used to hearing these sorts of very emotive and visceral comments about Donald Trump. In this case, and her answer to this question is really interesting, you ask her, Shannon, to react to the idea of Tim Walz becoming vice president of the US. Let's listen to that.
Do you think that he's suitable to be vice president?
Absolutely not.
Because?
I don't even know what's going on with him now, but
yeah.
His views are just not, and it has nothing to do with him being a Democrat. I don't like the way he is, like with the cop situation, military situation, taking so many things from both sides. A lot of his views I just don't agree with.
Yeah.
I just feel like he's a puppet right now. I don't really feel like he's actually speaking from what he really wants to do. I think he's hearing a lot of what everyone else wants him to say. But
and did you get the impression also that he's, what's the word for it? Because he comes across as a nice guy. But do you think that's a kind of...
I think that's more of a front, honestly.
You don't feel like he's standing up for the police at all?
No. I think he's disrespected them one too many times, and it's going to take a lot to come back from that. I mean, he'd have to do a lot of butt kissing, I think. Because I've heard so many stories from so many cops on what they've seen and heard, and none of them, politics aside, they just don't respect him enough anymore. After so many things that he's said and done, he just doesn't support them. And I don't know how you want to be protected, because if you're not going to support them, how do you expect them to support you?
I mean, what's interesting about Tim Walz is he's Mr. Nice Guy. That's why he gets picked. He's a really decent teacher. Kamala thinks that's perfect for hitting my Midwestern swing states. Minnesota isn't a swing state, but obviously the neighboring ones are. But what it creates is a problem for him, I think, that he's not, he's supposed to be Mr. Likeable. There's a saying, Minnesota nice, and that's why he's there. And so if widows of cops are not liking him and really disparaging of him, I think it is a problem. It's always hard to know how much a vice presidential candidate really matters. I mean, Dan Quayle was the worst ever, but didn't stop George H. Bush getting elected. So it isn't. I don't know how much difference it makes, but Walz was supposed to be there to bolster the white blue collar support for Kamala, and I just don't think he's cutting through on that at all. I don't really see that. And people like Shannon are pretty, pretty vociferous in that they really don't like him. And that's Minnesota. That's his home state. That's the state where they're supposed to really like him. That's the state where they know him. He, humble stuff. He's a teacher. He was in the National Guard, and they just don't trust him at all. But those people, and he's not helping, I don't think.
Rob, in the battle between the vice presidents as opposed to the potential next presidents, who do you think is cutting through? Is J.D. Vance cutting through more than Walz, would you say?
I'm not convinced that vice presidents make that much difference. I think J.D. Vance had a better debate than Walz. I thought Walz was pretty poor in the debate. But equally, at one point when Vance has said, do you ratify the 2020 election, he refused to answer, and that's pretty damning too. We seem to see a lot less of Vance out in America right now. He was pretty high profile at one point. I wonder also, actually, off the top of my head, but I do kind of half wonder if after he was so good in that debate, Trump didn't like him out so much. You don't really see much of him anymore. And he hasn't been doing a huge tour of the studios. Walz is still out there, and he was out with, I think it was with Obama the other day. So it's really hard to know. I mean, these are so fine margins and so tiny in these swing states, tens of thousands of votes that are going to edge, what is it? It's a country of 350, 360 million people. The margins are tiny, and it's really hard to know. But I guess they would argue that every Walz voter that turns up because he's this nice white guy from Minnesota, that in a swing state of Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Michigan, happy days.
Rob, you've been travelling around America, obviously, for 2 or 3 weeks now, I think. Is there a sense that stories like Shannon's are the ones that set the sort of terms of the politics? Or is it the bigger macro events or macro issues like, will I be better off or worse off under Kamala Harris or under Donald Trump? Or do things like Shannon really break through that idea of these singular, very emotional human moments?
Look, the economy is huge, and the economy's stupid and all that jazz, the famous phrase. You can't get away from that, and you can't get away from immigration either. Trump's fitness to govern is a huge one, and abortion is a huge one. But I think that when you've got a widow of a police officer and someone Josh Owen had previously served in the military and done a 2-year tour of Iraq. I mean, these are all American heroes, and it can't help the Democrats at all to have the widow saying to a governor of the state, "Do not come to my husband's funeral. You're not wanted. I don't like you." That's not good for business.
Rob Mendick, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Daily Tea. We will be speaking to you again, no doubt, as election night draws nearer.